Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Real Science Exchange, the pubcast where leading scientists and industry professionals meet over a few drinks to discuss the latest ideas and trends in animal nutrition. We've got a good one teed up for you today with Dr. Chuck Nicholson from the University of Wisconsin, and we're going to be reviewing his presentation titled Emerging Issue: Impacts of Changes in Milk Component Pricing on Dairy Farm Revenue. So, Chuck, welcome to the Real Science Exchange. Your first time here to the pub. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, great to have you.
To start us off, why don't you just kind of give us some background about yourself?
So I'm an agricultural economist focused on dairy. I have the pleasure right now working in a very dairy-centric state of Wisconsin, but have previously worked at universities in other key dairy states like California, New York, Pennsylvania, and Vermont.
Good, excellent.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, happy to have you. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce our co-host, Dr. Clay Zimmerman. Hello, Clay. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Scott. Thanks.
Color commentary today is going to be Brian Troyer. He's with Caledonia Farmers Elevator from Michigan. So welcome, Brian. Glad to have you.
Good to
Why
be
don't you
here.
tell us just a little bit about yourself?
Okay, yeah, thanks for having me, Scott. I've been at Caledonia now for a little over 20 years. I work primarily as a dairy financial consultant. I do a lot of business plans and budgeting and financial analysis, things like that. I also do some dairy nutrition tech support for our team, and then a variety of other things with our co-op, and provide some leadership to the younger staff that we have. I've been in the industry for 40 plus years, so I have a little bit of whatever you call that, wisdom,
Yeah, wisdom.
or something.
Expertise,
yes.
absolutely. Experience, we love it.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And next is Dr. Adam Locke. Adam, you're no stranger to the Real Science
Nope.
Exchange. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Appreciate having you here. Why don't you give the folks just a little bit of background on yourself?
Sure, yeah, Adam Locke. I'm from a dairy farm in England. Been at Michigan State now since 2009. I have a research extension appointment, lipid digestion, metabolism,
Yeah,
milk
excellent.
fat. Yeah.
Yeah, welcome back. Now, I understand that your mother's a bit of a fan of the Real Science Exchange.
She likes to listen to a lot of them. I introduced them to her last Christmas when I went back to England to pick her up here, and she certainly has a 5-star rating of which ones she likes and doesn't like, and is not afraid to tell me which ones have the best speakers on or not. So,
Or which
and
ones
I won't go any further than that. But she listens to quite a few of them now. So.
Maybe we could get her to give us one of those 5-star ratings and maybe a review on Apple. That'd
Yeah,
be awesome.
yeah, we might have to help her with that. But yeah,
Help with
yeah.
that. So she's not a tech savvy.
No.
Yeah. Okay.
No, my 13-year-old despairs sometimes. Yeah.
Just like my dad.
Yeah.
Chuck, why don't you start us off by telling us a little bit about the presentation, kind of some of the big key points that you're going to cover in it today.
Sure, I'm going to start out by kind of putting what I'll say later on into context. A lot of people will think about outlook being something, what's the milk price going to be, what our margins going to look like. I want to set the stage by talking a little bit about that. And then the core part of the presentation is really thinking about something that is changing how we will be pricing milk and milk components here in the United States for about 75% of the milk going forward. Talk about some of the implications for that. The spoiler alert is that will likely mean for a lot of farms that component values will be going down compared to where they have been in June. And then I want to segue that into talking about how we have changed the values of butterfat over time, longer term perspective on that. And I think Adam's going to help me clean up, not directly in the presentation, or maybe he doesn't know that yet, but we'll talk about some work that is looking at the impact on farm profitability of feeding high-oleic soybeans to increase milk fat yields in dairy cows. So that's kind of where we're going with this.
Oh, excellent. So one thing that kind of caught my eye is that the component values going down seems counterintuitive to me. It seems like we ought to be bringing more value to components.
That would be the dairy farmer's fervent desire for sure. And I'll tell you in the presentation a little bit about details about why this is happening and how it's going to work. But the basic idea is we have and this is where Adam's mother, I think, checks out on thinking about this. We have this very complicated system of setting minimum prices for milk that's based on component values. And we're going to make some changes to that And the changes to the way we do that are the thing that's going to bring the component values down, at least in the short term.
Okay. And why are we making these changes? What's behind that?
Basically because we've had a system that has been a little bit dysfunctional over the past few years of pricing milk, and more milk has been opting out of that pricing system. USDA had a series of very lengthy administrative hearings. I felt sorry for the people from USDA who had to sit in that room down in Indiana and listen to months and months of folks talking about this. And they determined at the end of it, the evidence supported making the kind of changes that they're going to be making.
Yeah.
And so that will be implemented. It was actually voted on by dairy farmers throughout the country. And basically, those changes were approved by dairy farmers and their organizations. And that will all start happening in June here, or June milk checks.
Okay. One more question before I turn it over to the panelists. So we operate in a global economy here. We did before tariffs anyway. So what impact is this going to have on maybe the global price of milk? The economics of feeding Reassure precision release choline. Reassure is fed during the transition period, and because it's fed for such a short period of time, it costs just $15 per cow, and yet the benefits will continue to generate income throughout the year. Cows fed Reassure produce 5 pounds more colostrum, which pays for your Reassure investment on the very first day of lactation. Cows fed Reassure also produce 5 pounds more milk per day, every day. That means after the first day, every day is payday. Invest in Reassure during the transition period and recoup your investment on the very first day of lactation. After that, you got it, payday.
So compared to what's going on with tariffs right now, this is kind of not that big a deal. It's important for dairy producers for sure. They might notice some changes, especially in the first few months as these new price regulations come in. The longer term picture is going to be more influenced by what we're doing on trade policy and how much we're going to be able to export to some of our key trading partners.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I was going to say, Scott, one of the, I think I started getting to know Chuck maybe last year or the year before last around some of our soybean work with the United Soybean Board. And when we were talking about, and I was asking him about the milk pricing, and I realized how heavily involved he's been. That's why we thought he'd be an excellent to come here and speak to the nutrition community about the milk pricing and the changes and how it will impact how they may want to feed cows as well.
Yeah, and I'll be counting on you guys to say how we should change feeding cows, since that's not really my thing.
Yeah.
So Chuck, short term, what will the net impact be on milk prices for the dairy?
Well, so that depends on where you are in the country, and it depends a little bit on how your milk is currently being priced. And I'll break that down as we talk about it. But the basic idea is we may be looking at reductions in a per hundredweight price of milk. Calculations here for the Mideast order would be about 32 cents a hundredweight. That's roughly 2% of what that milk price might look like. The thing that we got to keep in mind, though, is that that's like what hits the ground in June. But if you start messing around with what the milk price is and with what the margins are in farms, both people buying milk and people making milk are going to start making a little bit different decisions. And I'll talk about how that's going to have some impacts as we spread out over the next 5 years.
Okay.
So that's interesting with I think you said 30 cents. So is there then a way to look at, say, well, what would I have to change in my milk components to get back that 30%? You know, if I was producing the same 100 pounds of milk, is that an extra 0.2 units of butterfat, or?
I guess that's what I'm counting on you,
Okay.
Adam, to
All
say
right.
to people
Yeah.
at the end of that.
I'm just wondering, you know, how much would you have to get changed to get back to where you were?
Well, you could calculate what that additional milk fat would need to be. So if you think about that 1-2% thing, that's if you can increase the test and actually make it work on the feeding side, feed cost side, that would be where you want to be. And that's actually part of the reason to talk about the high-oleic soybean element of that too, is boosting those butterfat yields.
So will the pricing changes affect fat and protein pricing equally or differently?
Great question. A bit differently. So for butter and other solids and non-fat solids, those are all going to have sort of like the same impact every month. Protein is a little bit different because the protein formulas, the way we calculate the protein price depends on both the price of cheese and the price of butter, and they interact. So if you think about the range of possible values on protein, it's about 10 cents per pound is what we're looking at based on how those prices have fluctuated over time.
Okay.
To piggyback on that, Chuck, so I've listened to dairy farmers complain about the way we price milk for the last 15 years, but yet it feels like in this deal, at least in the Mideast where you and I live, we're going to lose in June. Our milk checks are going to shrink. Is everything that I read. So was this driven by the processors? Because I asked somebody, I said, why did farmers sign off on this? If you're a cheese and powder guy, it's going to go the wrong way. If you're in Florida and you're a fluid guy, it's going to be great. But that was confounding to me.
Yeah. So one of the reasons why primarily cooperatives got on board with this was many of those cooperatives are in the same situation of they buy milk and they make it into products, and they got to figure out how they're going to meet those manufacturing costs. And we don't have super good evidence about exactly what was going on, but we have some kind of anecdotal stories that basically said co-ops were taking a deduct from that minimum price, and so which they can do, and they were not maybe paying farmers the full value of those components anyway. And without trying to sound too cynical, it's not a good sort of visual if you're saying USDA reports this minimum price, and you're paying your members something that's a bit less than that. And so that was part of them getting on board, and also trying to get part of this idea was trying to get more milk back into the pricing system itself, the thing we call the pool. And they could do that by providing those kind of incentives through the changes in the pricing structure. So the bottom line on that is that if you look at the things that USDA is going to report, all those numbers go down unless you're in a place where there's a lot of fluid milk utilization, and then you're going to see an increase. What we don't know is exactly if you're not already getting that price, what happens. So for some farms, we may actually not see much of a decrease. And for some farms, particularly those that haven't been part of the pricing system, they might actually see a price increase. Might see some premiums coming back in the marketplace. And so it's a bit of a challenge to think about individual farms being in different positions. And it also, as I said, depends on where you are in the country.
Well, to kind of build on that, do you see this changing long term where it makes sense to dairy? So do you see the dairy populations moving around geographically?
I think we see a lot of that happening anyway, but this probably won't be a major impact on, is it good to be in Wisconsin? Is it good to be in Florida? This is relatively minor compared to the larger forces that are kind of at work in terms of where we're making investments in dairy facilities, processing plants, and dairy farms.
Yeah. Okay.
I assume the predictions are still that increasingly more and more dairy is going to go into products as opposed to fluid milk.
That's been a long-term trend. We've seen a little bit of a recovery in terms of per capita consumption of beverage milk, but the share that goes into cheese has been the real driver, and so that is likely to continue. We seem to have an insatiable appetite for pizza, is one of the big motivators for that.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting talking about the cheese piece and the changes in components with one of the presentations at Western about, is it over the last 10 years, we're now making a pound more cheese from 100 pounds of milk than we were 10, 15 years ago. And so I thought that was very interesting. That probably will continue as well if we continue these trends with components.
Yeah. So historically, we actually used to put extra solids into the vat. We'd put non-fat dry milk into a cheese vat, sometimes actually cream also to boost the solids on both the fat and the non-fat side. With the increase in the components that you guys are generating there on the nutrition side and with the help of the genetics, we don't need to do as much of that anymore.
Yeah, I think they're more skimming, having to take the cream off it now.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
Chuck, you asked the question earlier, how will this change how we feed cows? And so maybe I'd like to toss that to our nutritionists here. We got 3 nutritionists on the panel. Any ideas or thoughts in terms of how it will change how we feed cows?
I think to answer that, one question for Chuck is, even with the slight changes in the pricing, yield of fat, yield of protein coming off a farm is still what's driving the milk check. Is that correct?
I mean, that's the main part of it.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, it's the value of the components is that price times the quantity.
Yeah.
So as you had pointed out earlier, if you can make more components for 100 pounds of milk, that can be an offset to any of the price reductions that we're looking at. And again, keep in mind, this is 1-2%, which is not going to be desirable for any farmer to say, hey, you're taking a 1% pay cut on components right now. But there are things you can do to try and offset that, as you've pointed out.
Yeah.
So we've made really major strides in milk fat percentage here in the U.S., and it's really accelerated the last few years even.
Yeah.
So what's the long-term outlook for butter pricing, in your opinion?
So nobody knows. We have seen strong demand for butterfat, both here in the United States and globally. And if you look at the global trends, we're going to continue to see increased demand for all kinds of dairy products, and the butterfat part of that included. It's been a little bit surprising to me that we've grown the component value so much in farm milk, and yet we will continue to see for probably the next couple of years strong butter prices and perhaps increasing butter prices. After that, I think it's a little bit more murky, because one of the things that we're really good at doing here in the U.S., and better now really I think than anywhere else in the world, is we can make more milk in a hurry when there's incentives to do that.
Right.
We got the land base, we got the infrastructure in place to make that happen. We're going to have tons of, like, billions of dollars worth of cheese processing capacity coming online here in the next couple of years. That's going to require more milk to fill those plants up to where they should be. So there's a lot of potential there, and whether or not we can overdo it is kind of the thing that I think we need to keep an eye on.
Right.
Yeah.
That's one thing I've always said. In this country, we have an amazing ability to make a lot of milk in a hurry. Like one of my old econ professors at Michigan State said this. When the price of milk goes down, we can make more milk because we need more volume. When the price of milk goes high, we're really good at making a lot of milk because we want that extra milk check. So we're our own worst enemy in the U.S. because our system is kind of sort of unregulated compared. We don't have a quota system like some countries do. If we ever get to that point, then that will, I think, change some of the things we're talking about too. But butter and cheese and stuff, I think that it seems to me that looks like it will continue to grow and demand.
But from a nutrition point of view, I don't know what you think, Brian, but to me it sounds like I don't think we necessarily change our focus on nutrition of driving fat and protein yields. Is that kind of what you're thinking as well? Yeah. So I don't see a big change.
Yeah, they're still valuable components.
Yeah.
They're just a little bit less valuable coming into the middle of the year here than they would have been otherwise. And again, these are notable but relatively modest changes to what that would look like. An economist, you got to be careful about trusting economists there, especially a professional economist. But we would say if the component has less value, you may push the cow a little bit less hard to get that. The other alternative is you figure out some kind of feeding strategy is going to get those components back that actually will pay. And that's part of where this high-oleic soybean idea comes in.
So with all of the cheese production capacity coming online, that should be favorable for milk protein prices, right?
Yes, it should be. One of the key things that we'll have to keep an eye on is many of those plants were built with the idea that they would support export markets. And so we're in a very uncertain time with regard to where our export volumes are going to be over the next couple of years. And so I guess we'll have to see. That may also change a little bit the trajectory of when people bring those plants online, that kind of thing, which would affect both what's going on with milk production and component production, the pricing, and then also what we're actually able to do in our export markets.
Yeah.
With some of these new cheese plants, I know the one in Michigan that came on, they have a lot of whey processing capacity at the back end to, make more value out of that. Does that shift into that? Does that long-term drive more value in protein if you can get more out of the non-cheese part of it as well?
Yeah, we've definitely moved in the direction of taking more of that waste stream and turning it into products that have value. And actually, one of our major exports, for a variety of reasons, animal feed, infant formula, is actually various forms of whey products, right? And so that's part of the incentive that's going on with bringing these big cheese plants online. There's making cheese, and then there's also these products that actually tend to be more shelf stable. You can ship them longer distances, a growing demand outside the U.S. for them too.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
The other thing I've observed is as we made this shift from, like, when I got out of school for 50 years ago, we would, a 3.2, 3.3 butterfat was very acceptable, but we weren't compensated for anything much above that. Like, we only got penalized if we got below a 3. And today, if you had a 3, somebody would think something was wrong with your farm. So, and when we went to component pricing, and then in the last 5 to 10 years, we've incentivized that protein in butter. Well, when butterfat took off, that's when we really figured out how to make more butterfat. And so I always say farmers are really good at figuring out how to capture that dollar. If you can tell me it's going to be worth something, I'll figure out how to get it. And that's what we really have done. Some people want to give genomics a lot of credit for this big jump in butterfat, and I argue it's actually more nutrition related. There's probably two schools of thought on that, and I'm probably, even though I'm a quote unquote geneticist by training, I'm in the minority apparently on this, because every talk I hear, they want to give genomics all the credit for the increase in, or a lot of the increase. Adam and I argued about this last week at Reno.
But it was funny. I was just going to say, well, I think actually, but interesting, the timing of the increases in fat value did coincide with the increase in genomics. And I've learned a lot, listened to a lot with Mike Vanderhaar about this recently. And I think it's both. You're not going to have one without the other, right? Actually, I read a recent Hordes article from a geneticist that actually put more credit on the nutrition than the genetic side. But you definitely have to have both there, right? So it's kind of amazing where we've gone and where might we go, with that.
That's kind of a nice segue. I had a nice conversation yesterday with your grad student. He was talking about some research that he's done where you're able to, I think you were feeding fatty acids and amino acids and significantly increasing milk solids. Would you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I don't want to take highest thunder too much. He's presenting that abstract at ADSA this summer, but it was fresh cows we were feeding, and it kind of built on some stuff that Bill Weiss did at Ohio State. Cornell have done some around transition period, and Jair designed the study where we had 2 levels of metabolizable protein, like a standard and then a bit higher, and then we fed either 0, 1, or 2% of a palmitic-oleic blend, like a 60-30 that we've been doing a lot of work with. And if you just took the lowest, the 0 low protein to the high protein, high fat, that was 9.5 kilos more energy corrected milk in the first 3 weeks. Interestingly, and this is something, actually, I think we're going to talk a bit more at ADSA in a nutrition session there around milk fat. Some of the changes you do to the protein side of the diet actually has a bigger impact on milk fat than it does on milk protein. And actually, it overall had a bigger impact on milk fat than the fat supplementation.
Yeah.
But importantly, the effects were additive. So you get the best of both. And then there was a carryover effects on the fat side as well. So we're learning more and more, right?
Sure.
And I think I couched it last week in Reno was, with all of this, can the nutritionists keep up with the genetic progress? And I think we're doing a good job.
Yeah.
But it's gonna be, how do we keep doing that? So,
Yeah.
new technologies, innovative ideas, and that, especially in that early lactation cow, if we set her up right there, I think we can have some long-term benefits. But yeah, we're excited. I'd like to get more involved in some of the how do those amino acids impact milk fat as well. So
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
How long was your supplementation? on
3
that?
weeks, the first 3 weeks, and then we put them on a very simple diet, and there was a carryover effect as well. So I did some of the economics for his presentation here in the student competition, and it was. I mean, obviously the cost of the diets were a lot more,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
income over feed cost was the
Mhm.
key thing there. And Chuck and I have had some interesting discussions lately about cost of diet versus the milk, and I guess everyone has different philosophies on that as well, right?
Yeah, actually, Adam, I'd be interested in hearing what your summary would be of the biological response, if you will, of the high-oleic studies that I'll be talking about the economics for.
Okay. So I think we're doing a webinar in June, I think, to talk more about that. But Alicia Bales, who actually works with Brian now, and Caledonia actually helped support some of her graduate work as well, along with the United Soybean Board. Done a series of studies now, around the unique, I think high-oleic soybeans is a very unique ingredient. Nothing out there in the market has that level of oleic acid in its oil. It's about almost 80%. So it's that oil within high-oleic soybeans. It's the unique piece of it, right? So we've had a lot of data now around potential benefits of oleic acid in transition cows, fresh cows, on fatty acid absorption. And really interesting is we get very good responses in energy corrected milk in the highest producing cows. So is that maybe we're getting better at more nutrients absorbed, more energy being partitioned to the mammary glands. So under our conditions, we've always seen improvements in milk yield, fat yield, and mostly protein yield as well, when we're feeding them. So Chuck's done a series of analysis on the economics on our first two studies, our dose response, and then raw versus roasted. And I think everyone will be very interested in seeing some of that tomorrow, and how it's looked over the last 10 years of milk pricing. But I think importantly, how you price the beans as well, homegrown versus are you buying them in at different premiums. I would certainly go, if my recommendation would be to roast. If it's on farm, there's some additional costs, interest, some consistency things you have to be there, but I'd be roasting them. I think it's definitely you get a better response.
Now, you talked a little bit about homegrown versus purchased. A lot of the dairy cattle in the United States can't grow soybeans, right? And so what's the economics look like? Does it make sense to ship soybeans to California?
Yeah, I'm not sure it makes sense to go that far. We're seeing some big changes in Michigan right now.
Yeah, right. We've looked at that, and so the transportation cost, even across our state, is depending on, again, what you got to pay for the bean if you're going to buy it from a crop farmer. And up until this year, the crop farmer probably hesitated to grow it because of the chemistry involved with killing the weeds around it. Like a good friend of mine is one of those 10,000 acre farmers who said they're not going to pay me enough to grow that bean to change my tillage practices. But this year, I think that is changing, and that will change how those beans are going to be priced. And then, but there's times when we do the economics in-house when we do a diet, and it doesn't pay to buy or transport too far.
Got it.
So it'll be, but most Michigan dairymen probably grow some soybeans. Like we have a corn soybean rotation on most of our farms, and then some alfalfa. So if it fits to grow the soybeans, we've got guys that want to do that. And we've actually had some crop farmers call our co-op and say, at least no, they're not going to pay us enough to grow conventional soybeans. Can we grow these for you guys? And so we've kind of done the math and figured out what we could pay to do that. So
yeah, there's kind of this sweet spot between paying the farmer that you're going to buy from enough to get them interested based on the things you've been talking about, and then not pricing it out of being a good addition to the ration. And that's kind of the sweet spot that we're going to talk about later on here. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think in those areas where there are strong dairy and soybean growing, farmers communities, it makes a lot of sense. But your idea about shipping to California is interesting because these beans were originally, developed for crushing and using the oil, right? And I've had a few instances of nutritionists say to me, we can't get the beans, but I can get the oil. Because
go.
and that depends on a whole series of economic things.
Yeah,
But
right.
so we're actually doing a study right now with the oil, because if we can replicate the responses that we see with the bean with the oil, which is the unique part of the bean, that potentially opens up its use in other markets, I think.
Do you see rumen disturbance with the oil versus the beans?
I will tell you in a couple months' time.
All right, there
Yeah. So, but I would have said maybe if we did this a decade ago,
Yeah.
but we've learned a lot. That's when I first moved over here,
Right.
that coming here was the first time I'd seen a butterfat below 4.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So now, it's actually, I remember Kevin Harvey made a good point about this. We don't really talk about milk fat depression now, but maybe we should to some extent. But our bar of where, anything maybe below a 3.9 now is a milk fat depression. Whereas, when I first
Yeah,
moved over
right.
here, if a farm had a 3.5, they were doing really good, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. So it's interesting like that. So, I think I think our highest dose in that study is 2% added oil with the high-oleic. So, you have to set the rest of the diet up well. But I'm excited to see those responses.
Yeah. Keep nutritionists employed.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right. Chuck, have we missed any high points of the talk that we need to cover?
I'm trying to think here.
So what is the outlook for 2025 for dairy in the U.S.?
So if you think about the baseline that we might start from, we're actually likely to look at a pretty good margin year. 23 for a lot of folks was a low margin year. We actually got down to some record low margins for a brief period of time in the middle of the year. 24 was a pretty good year because we had some moderation on the feed price side and some pretty strong milk prices. For this year, we're not looking at 23 and we're not looking at a 24, but we're looking at something in the middle. My forecasts are that we'll be at about $3 above the average long-term margin, milk minus ration value. That shapes up to be a pretty reasonable year. And that's despite the fact that we're looking at these pricing changes coming up. Where the big wild card is really what's going on with our dairy exports and our trade policy. That could actually have a fairly significant impact on what that would look like going forward. So not looking at a bad year based on what I and futures markets, perhaps more importantly, are thinking is going to be the trajectory here.
Yeah. Right.
Good.
Exactly.
Anything else in?
No, it's been a good discussion.
No,
Thank
it's
you.
been a great discussion. I've enjoyed it. I want to thank you guys for joining us. What I'd like to do is, before we close it out, is just kind of go around the table and kind of give one or two key takeaways for the audience. And if you don't mind, Clay, I'd like to start with you.
Our last call question is sponsored by AminoSure XM Precision Release Methionine, the next generation in amino acid balancing. With AminoSure XM, you can save up to 5 cents per cow per day on your methionine investment. Try it today and receive an additional 2.5 cents per cow per day savings with Balchem's limited time rebate offer. Contact your Balchem representative to learn more.
Yeah, so really looking forward to hearing your full talk later.
Thank you.
But yeah, I think from a nutritionist perspective, as we discussed, I don't think anything will change here short term, right? It pays to feed for milk components, period. And nothing's going to change that. But we just need to continue to do what we're doing. And Adam, I'm actually really excited to hear about this new research that you've been doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Brian, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, a couple. Just on looking out over the next year, I'm working on some budgets right now, and I'm also looking at first quarter numbers as part of my financial work. And the cost of production, I just tell producers, you got to keep an eye on that, and you need to understand it. A lot of producers don't know what it costs to make 100 pounds of milk. And so when things get a little tight on the farm, they kind of panic. And so I said, let's figure that out. But I think, and I always tell guys, another 5 pounds of milk, economically, we don't want to buy this 5 pounds of milk. But if we can get 5 pounds of milk doing something like feeding high-oleic beans or some other management practice, that makes a world of difference in your cash flow and in your bottom line. And in a year like this, that's the difference between the people that survive and the people at the end of the year that decide to sell their cows.
Talk to me a little more about that, buying that 5 pounds of milk. What do you mean by that? Using
So if it's gonna cost me $3 to get $3 worth of milk, I'm buying the milk. And what Adam was talking about, his study, I listened to his students talk yesterday, and they were investing $1.70 and getting $2.70 to $3 worth of milk. That I can sell that all day long to my guys. So yeah. Yep.
And the other aspect of that, I remember hearing someone else, you may be paying $3 more, but you're also then diluting out the cost of the.
That's true. You are.
Yeah, so I've heard that with palmitic acid before, for example, right, where they just say, well, I get this
right
for the milk fat, but I'm here,
Mm-hmm.
but you kind of forget what are some of the other benefits you might be getting from that additional energy, because it's not all doesn't all go to milk. There's no other feed ingredients that I know that you only base it on what impact it has in the milk, right? So
no, that's a great point.
yeah.
Any final thoughts, Adam?
This has been really interesting,
Yeah, it
and
has.
I'm glad Chuck has joined us down here at Tri-State. I thought everyone's going to gain a lot of information, and I think knowing that we're going to continue to drive components, and the only change with that would be if there was a sea change in everything was going more to fluid and less to cheese and yogurts, and so I think for us, knowing that we got to still continue to focus on how we can more efficiently and increase fat and protein, I think that's a really good take home for me.
Yeah. Great comments. Chuck, take us home.
Okay, so my takeaway is it's looking like a fairly reasonable margin year in most parts of the country. And that's despite the fact that we're going to see these pricing changes in June that are going to, at least initially, lower component values for folks who are actually playing in part of the regulated system of milk pricing that we have here. And then there are some wild cards out there that relate to our economy, our trade policies that folks should keep an eye out for, both directly themselves, and you're going to help them out when they're looking at that, and through their organizations to kind of have voices be heard.
Yep.
Yeah, good. Chuck, this has been an interesting topic. Thank you for joining us. It's been good.
Great to be here. I'd
Yeah.
even be happy to come back.
Yeah, well, we'll have to
if
have
I
you
ever
back.
had something to say.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely. Anytime. Clay, thanks again. We'll see you later on today. Brian, thank you for joining us for the first time here. We'll have to have you back as well.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.
Adam, always great to see you. Tell your mom I said hi.
I will.
Okay,
I will.
Very well. To our loyal audience, thank you for coming along with us once again. We hope you learned something. We hope you had some fun, and we'll hope to see you next time here at Real Science Exchange, where it's always happy hour and you're always among friends. Hi, I'm Scott Sorrell. I'm here to invite you to a very special event at the upcoming ADSA conference in Louisville. It's going to be a bourbon tasting. We're calling it Bourbon and Brainiacs. Now, why do you call it Bourbon and Brainiacs? Because we're going to have all your favorite professors there doing a bourbon tasting. We're going to have 6 to 8 bourbons there. We're going to be recording a podcast and doing the tasting while we're there. We've even got a bourbon barista, which I'm not sure exactly what that is, but we're going to have one of them there. Now listen, this is only for 120 of our favorite friends. That's all this place holds. We're going to have it at the Fraser Museum. It's a bourbon museum there in Louisville, and so only 120 people can fit in there, and so we want you to be one of them. And so to become one of the 120, all you have to do is go to balchem.com/bourbon and register. Once those 120 slots are gone, they're going to be gone, but I hope to see you there.
We'd love to hear your comments or ideas for topics and guests. So please reach out via email to anh.marketing@balchem.com with any suggestions, and we'll work hard to add them to the schedule. Don't forget to leave a 5-star rating on your way out. You can request your Real Science Exchange t-shirt in just a few easy steps. Just like or subscribe to the Real Science Exchange and send us a screenshot along with your address and t-shirt size to anh.marketing@balchem.com. Balchem's Real Science Lecture Series of webinars continues with ruminant-focused topics on the first Tuesday of every month, monogastric-focused topics on the second Tuesday of each month, and quarterly topics for the companion animal segment. Visit balchem.com/realscience to see the latest schedule and to register for upcoming webinars.